Hello, everybody. My name is Boulevard. Welcome to Tournament Tactician for the Heart of the Huntress Runeterra Open, the first one of Season 2. Get them Runeterra points in. This meta is actually fairly solved, I feel. I think I've actually got a really good grasp on this one. I know for the last couple of opens, it kind of feels like I'm getting up here and I'm floundering like, oh my god, like, there's so many different directions this could go. No, I think this one actually feels kind of cut and dry, and I'm going to try not to overcomplicate it. Essentially, there are three kinds of lineups that you're going to see perform well. And they are double Siren Song lineups, control lineups, and mid-range lineups. And the double Siren Songs are going to be, obviously, Fizz and Evelyn, and then from there, it's kind of a question mark on what the third deck is. There's really no, like, dedicated third deck for the Siren Song lineups because most people aren't going triple Siren Song. I don't think it's correct to go triple Siren Song. And so what their third deck is always going to be a little bit of a mystery, a bit of a toss-up, can kind of throw a bit of a wrench in your matchup charts. Control, for the most part, you're going to see a lot of Jin Nar, a lot of Karma Set, and then the third deck is sometimes it's going to be another Jin Nar deck. Or, sorry, not another Jin Nar deck, another broad main deck, like a Nora something. Most often, I would say it's just going to be Fizz Targon, the Reavers or Targon deck. I think is like, you just run that as band bait because it's a very good deck right now. Or it's going to be, like Sump Monument. Puff Caps might fit into a lineup like this. The other one that I think is going to be pretty good is like a Lowy Swain, where like some people kind of consider this control deck, some people kind of consider it a mid-range deck. It's a very flexible pick. I think you're going to see it as the third deck in quite a few lineups. Then mid-range, we're mostly talking about like Demacia mid-range. Like you're seeing a lot of, or Demacia-esque mid-range, right? Like a Lowy Swain, I think Spid's kind of categorized in that when we were casting the Mastering Runeterra Open last weekend, which I don't totally disagree with in terms of like lineup composition, just in the same sense that I will call Scion an aggro deck if it's in a double aggro lineup, that, right? You've heard me say that before. I'll call Scion plus aggro, a triple aggro lineup. It's kind of where a Lowy Swain is like Demacia mid-range, or even just these mid-range decks in general are Demacia, but the most popular one is probably going to be Aatrox Vayne Quinn. This hasn't really lost a whole lot. It's still a solid option. And like Jax Orange, Scouts, maybe some other varying champion strength piles are going to fill in there because they're doing well into Karma Set specifically. Obviously not so well the broad main, but that's Karma Set's big weakness and one of the things that is keeping it off of being a top dog because Karma Set does so well into every variation of Siren Song. It's one of the only decks that is consistently performing into both the Evelyn and the Fizz variations of that deck. So Karma Set good, but that's why mid-range exists. Broad main good because it doesn't have the weaknesses that Karma Set does, but obviously like doesn't really have the strengths into Siren Song. So like in terms of what I think you should be doing, this is a very comfort-oriented meta. Personally, I play a lot more control, so I would be coming in right now, if you made me, I'd probably be on Karma Set, Jin Nar, and Reavers Rotargon. It's just where I'm at right now. Those are the decks I've been playing and enjoying, and I am comfortable on. And I think that's a big thing right now. Now, I've added a Gambit tier, right? Because every open, we get a deck that pops up the week of the open, and there's simply not enough time to evaluate it. Now, all I can kind of do is give you a breakdown of this deck. If you haven't seen it before, it's the Puff Cap deck that you know and love with Sump Monument in it. The idea being that you are going to be more resilient to the mid-range decks that you would sometimes kind of struggle with because Puff Cap's biggest weakness has always been a lack of defensive tools. You don't want to be blocking with Teemo or Puff Cap Peddler, and outside of that, your utility units like, Chump Wump, maybe Conchologist if you're running that. Like Conchologist isn't progressing your game plan, which is a bit of an issue unless you already have Puff Cap Peddler out. And Chump of Wumps is like expensive, so you're not going wide to match something like a Fizz deck on board, right? So Sump Monument helps you get a little bit longer in the game. The reason that I think this deck is good right now is because Control is good right now. And inherently, Puff Caps are going to do pretty well against Control because the game goes longer, and they're not really pressuring your Nexus. They tend to try to out-resource you. Luckily, the only deck in the format that is currently en masse running landmark removal is Karma Set, which Puff Caps historically has always been very favored into anyway because they want to go to turn 10 before they even attempt to start ending the game. So I'm not sure where I fall on it. Ultimately, I don't think I love it, especially because I think mid-range is already kind of holding Karma Set at a bit of a disadvantage, sort of how many, like, play rate-wise. I think you're not going to see as much Karma Set as you should because mid-range exists, and therefore Sump Monument isn't really finding its like best matchup as often as it would like to. And when we look at the ladder stats right now, nope, I don't have them, but Sump Monument Puff Caps is like a top 5 deck right now, and I think Karma Set's like the number 2 deck on ladder play rate wise, and I think that's one of the reasons that Sump Monument Puff Caps is getting to maintain that 50% win rate. The Gamba tier, run it at your own risk, right? Like if you're wondering what this is for, like back in April, this was Nasus, right? Nasus popped up like the Monday of the Open. No one was really sure how to evaluate it. It seemed to be doing very well, but then by the time that we actually got to the Open, it had kind of really fallen off. I think it was like a 10th in play rate or something like that. It was not a lot. Oh, that's right. I actually do have the numbers right here, because one of the things that I want to try here is taking a look at the previous Mastering Runeterra Opens that happened right before the actual Runeterra Open, and sort of gleaning what we can actually learn from that meta breakdown. So what I have here is the April Runeterra Open right here. This is the Swiss play rate of the decks, the top 10 decks through the Swiss rounds, and then the actual top 8, and then the Swiss top 64 and actual top 64 conversion from the Runeterra Open. So, for example, in the May Runeterra Open, Majin Bay won with Karma Set, Samira Jack Seraphine, and then actually down here, sort of just as like a little fun fact, I have what Majin Bay then took to the Open and what they took into the top 64. So like Majin Bay wins the the Mastering Runeterra Open with Karma Set, Samira Jack Seraphine, runs that lineup back into the Runeterra Open, and then makes it to the top 64 where they once again run that lineup back. Then, Card Gamer goes and wins the event with Samira Varus, Leona Kale, and Aatrox Vayne. And one of the important things about the Gambit here is that every Open last season had some kind of big mix-up in the week of the Open, in between the Mastering Runeterra Open and the actual event. This time around in April, it was the separation of Noxus Leona from Samira Fizz. Because when you look at these numbers, there were 47 Noxus Leona in the Mastering Runeterra Open, and then 37 of them were for Samira. And then once we got to the Runeterra Open, we all realized, like, oh shit, we don't have to put Samira and Leona. We can just play Leona, Kale, Noxus, and that's very powerful. And then we can also run Samira Fizz alongside of that, which turned out to be the line, and Card Gamer ended up winning with Samira Varus, Leona, Kale, and Aatrox Vayne. A lot of people also point to this as a target lineup for Karma Set, which was expected to be very popular, did turn out to be very popular. And it's one of the reasons that like Aatrox Vayne is looking good again. Karma Set and Aatrox Vayne really haven't changed a whole lot, and it is important to note that Hexbliterator is currently bugged in that if it kills a unit, it will not obliterate the weapon. I think it doesn't actually obliterate at all. Someone was telling me that last breath effects will still go off of it, so I know it doesn't kill weapons, which is another sort of, point in the bucket for Aatrox Vayne that it just did not need. Right? But anyway, point is, when we look at the play rate from the Mastering Runeterra Open into the actual Runeterra Open, they got the number 1 deck right. The number 2 deck like fell down to number 4. Number 3 stayed where it's at. Another number 3 deck like fell all the way down here. Like Gwen Quinn had 26 players in the Open, so like not a perfect picture. And a lot of it actually was Samira Fizz rising up to the top here, because outside of that, like when you look at the top 4, like 1, 2, and 3 are still in here. Granted, Gwen Quinn completely fell off, but if you didn't see that one coming, that's on you. So, yeah, an okay representation. When we look at the top of the top 8, though, suddenly we're getting a much better picture. We're seeing Noxus Leona. We're seeing Samira Fizz, staying up here. Frostbite mid-range, again, still in a similar spot. Karma Set in a similar spot. Jack Seraphine in a similar spot. So, like, every deck that wasn't a one of actually did make up the top 5 of the Runeterra Open, right? Then we look at May. This was the Nasus one, I think. No? Was this Nasus? Yes, this was Nasus. I think I said earlier that it was April. It was actually May. So, Bandle Gunners comes in. We got 26 Demacia, 23 Bilgewater, Samira Fizz, Samira Pantheon, Alawi Swain, Aatrox Vayne, Jinx Mary. You get the idea, right? So when we look over here, got the number 1 deck right, got the number 2 deck right. 3 and 4 kind of really fell down. And I don't know that this was a byproduct of the Nasus popping into the meta, because like Nasus also wasn't doing super hot. It wasn't even a top 5 deck. I thought it was a lot further down, but it was actually... Okay, so it wasn't the 10th deck. It had 10 people bring it into top 64. That's where I got the 10 from. Again, this was the Gambit deck. This was the thing that popped up after the Mastering Runeterra Open, into the Runeterra Open, and like, it put people in. It wasn't the best. It wasn't all that in a bag of chips, and I think Teemo's in a similar vein. I think Teemo is a little more cut and dry in his matchup charts, though, a little more polarizing, if you will. So take that as you will. But then like Echo, Jinx, and Nasus weren't anywhere on the top 10 play rate over here. Neither was Kai'Sa, which by attack ended up winning with and then running back and making it to top 64 again, just switching out like the Gunners lineup. So far, whatever won ended up at least getting the winner back into top 64. That's a good trend to make note of, right? And then Drissoth goes and wins with Karmaset, Bilgewater Gunners, Samira Fizz, which, yeah, the number 1, the number 2, the number 3 deck. And from over here, the number 1, the number 2, and Karmaset was like 9th, yeah. So not a great representation, kind of what I'm getting at here. When we go back to April, I just want to point out Samira, Aris, Leona, Kale, Aatrox Vayne was it's 1, 6, and 8. Not doing so hot in terms of representation, but as far as the top cut here, 1, 2, 8, you know, the most popular decks tend to be winning. Kind of the point I'm getting at here. Then we look at June. The mix-up for June was the Timelines hotfix, which really throws things, like, it doesn't even really feel fair to try and compare the Mastering Runeterra Open to the first Open. That said, Timelines turned out to be fine, so I think it's still a fair enough comparison. I don't know why the fuck so many people were playing Nasus. That one's wild to me. I don't know how we got that so wicked wrong. So when we look over here, this is easily like the worst numbers, right? The number 1 deck is not present at all in the top 64. The number 2 deck, I just lumped all the timelines together under this banner. Like, it's kind of weird because I separated out timelines in this chart, and then I didn't separate out timelines in this chart, but timelines was the number 2 deck, both in Bandle timelines and just, you know, overall. So even if we call it number 1 because there were more timelines than Nasus overall, still falls down to the 4th place spot. Jaxorn and Pirates, absolutely nowhere in the Mastering Runeterra Open in terms of, like, you can see here, we get down to, like, 4 people brought Rise out of 84 players. So, like, Pirates and Jaxorn were lower than this. You see what I mean? And then we have Hobbits' win with triple timelines. Hobbits' did not make it back to the top 64 that time around, but of course it did go on to win the EMEA Runeterra Open. And then Taigai comes in with Plaza Guardian, Trundle Timelines, Karmaset, which is, again, 1, 4... And Karmaset, yeah, didn't make it here. But over here, we're looking at, what, 1, 5, and 6? 1, 4, and 5? Not bad. All of this to say, I put a lot of time into analyzing how good the Mastering Runeterra Open was at actually predicting what the Runeterra Open was going to look like, and the conclusion I came to was that it's not very fucking good at being an accurate representation of what is going to make it into the Runeterra Open. That's the takeaway here. That's it. I did all of this work so that I could tell you that this meta and this meta are very different. And even when you look at Top Cut, it's not even like the top 8 meta is great at predicting the Runeterra Open meta. Like, just the Mastering Runeterra Open is not indicative of the Runeterra Open. And I thought it would be cool to go and check if there was a bit of an inclination. And for the most part, no. There's just really not. That said, looking at the July Mastering Runeterra Open, Fizz Targon comes in at the number 1 deck. I think that's going to remain the case. Alawi Swain is the number 2 deck. It was like, yeah, it was number 5 overall, but when we look at Top Cut, it was number 2, and I think Alawi Swain might just hold on to that number 2 slot as just, like, being such a flexible pick for a lot of lineups. What's interesting to me about Alawi Swain is that right now the meta is the least champion reliant it has ever been, but it is not the least key card reliant it has ever been. Like, for example, if you're running Fizz Targon, think of your champions more as Reaver's Row and Siren Song. If you are playing Jhin Broadmane, think of your champions more as, you know, Broadmane and Riptide Rex. If you're playing Evelyn Targon, you know, think of it as Siren Song and Evelyn. Alawi Swain is the only one that's, like, still reliant on drawing both champions. Karmaset also, although Karmaset just needs both champions, like, in the end game. They don't need both, like, they don't need Karma until turn 10, so they're really not on as much of a clock. But the point is, like, Alawi Swain is the one deck that, like, still needs to find its champions in a timely fashion, but it is not the one that needs to find its key cards in a timely fashion, and that is, I think, a big difference maker. The problem is that if Alawi Swain doesn't find its champions in a timely fashion, it kind of looks like dog shit. But it's been, like, it's got a very strong curve. And while I am down on it, I do have to admit its strength, and I think it might actually end up being the number 2 deck again. Nar Jhin, I think, also has a good chance of being the number 2 deck, so, like, I think this is your top 3. I don't think you're going to see too much outside of that. We even saw here that people weren't really willing to bring Evelyn Targon. Like, the double Siren Song lineup is just not something that your average tournament player is on. But culturally, based on what I've been seeing on Reddit and Twitter and all these different community outlets, the community just seems to understand that Siren Song is extremely powerful. And so I think your average Redditor who does not interact with tournaments is a lot more likely to bring a triple Siren Song lineup. Now, do with that information what you will, because the Swiss rounds are obviously going to be a bit of a fiesta. You can play against anyone, and I think that you can't really look at tournaments and go, oh, double Siren Song isn't performing well, and then go in with a bunch of bad Evelyn matchups and call it a day. It's something that you need to be aware of, that your average player, which is now your average competitor, is going to be looking at. They're not looking at these stats. They're not watching these videos. So Evelyn Zelani, I don't think it, like, I think if you look at the play rate for the Open, which is something that we can't do, unfortunately, I think it would be like a top 5 deck. As far as where it actually lands in the top cut of this event, I think it's probably going to be outside of the top 5. Don't know why I copied that one over. It's embarrassing. Oh my god. Oh my god, Boulevard. What the fuck? Oh my god, I fucked up so bad. Aatrox Vayne, I think, should make top 5. I don't know if it will, but I feel like it should. I think mid-range is rather strong. I think that a lot of people are going to be on Karmaset still, or there's a perception that a lot of people are going to be on Karmaset, and so Aatrox Vayne. It'd probably be number 5, if anything. I just realized that I moved it from the 5th to the 6th place spot. But also, I don't really have a good read on, like, what else would take its spot. Like, Karmaset, I think, does come up a little bit, but I don't think Jaxorn and Scouts are going to be very popular. I think there's so many different flavors of mid-range that you're not going to see one unanimously take over. And so that's just kind of where I'm landing on, like, our top 5. Now, I don't, like, this doesn't look right to me. But I do think that Evelyn Zelani doesn't make a top 5. I mean, it might actually. It just might. I think I'd feel better if I did this, just based on the fact that people really like running double Siren Song decks. So this looks better to me. This looks even better to me. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Something like this, because I'm still not sure where Alawi Swain versus Narjin is really going to settle. But this is kind of what I'm predicting for your top 5 breakdown, your top 6 breakdown, if you will. Also, Evelyn Targon, Fizz Targon, Alawi Swain was the winning lineup, and as we did mention previously, the one thing that we can take away from the Mastering Runeterra Opens is that whoever, like, the winning lineup does still perform well and get people back into top 64. That is something that is worth noting, and this time around, it was double Siren Song. So, I also want to make note of a couple of daily Mastering Runeterra tournaments that have happened since that Mastering Runeterra Open, including this one on Monday, which was won by the Gamba deck, the Fizz Reavers Row, and Alawi Swain, right? Again, Alawi Swain just continuing to, like, if you have Watchful Idol on 1 into Seize Voice into Alawi, that's a strong curve. If you, like, draw your removal, that's a strong curve. The issue is, like, kind of getting that perfect hand. And it seems to happen a lot more frequently than it used to, despite absolutely no changes to this list from forever ago. Then when we look at Tuesday's Mastering Runeterra, or daily, Mastering Runeterra Daily, because I'm shooting this on Wednesday, so we don't have the data from the Wednesday tournament yet. We're looking again at Fizz Reavers Row, Kennen Reavers Row, and Lucian Reavers Row. So triple Reavers Row, or yeah, triple Siren Song, yeah, you get the idea. It's triple Siren Song, but also triple Reavers Row. So that's kind of like, these tournaments aren't the be-all, end-all, but it does just kind of reinforce that, like, people are experimenting with different ways to bring multiple Siren Song decks, even if it's not the Evelyn variation. People are trying out the Sump Monument deck to an amount of success, and then we go back to our original tier list here, and this is just kind of what we're looking at. I think Reavers Row Targon is far and away the best deck in the game. It's obviously going to be the number 1. It's in a tier of its own right now. I feel pretty confident saying that. Not tier 0. Not saying it's tier 0. Saying it's in a tier of its own, which is fair. Then we just have every deck that I said was going to round out the top 5, and then we've kind of just got everything else. I think these decks are a lot stronger, a lot more explosive, even if they're not as consistent, but we're kind of playing an inconsistent game right now. As mentioned, everybody has power cards and because everybody has power cards, you run into a lot of games where, like, one player finds the power card and the other player doesn't. And that's kind of the issue I think people are having with Karmaset right now, is it's kind of the only deck that is running around that doesn't have power cards. And Jin Nar is also not super reliant on finding its power cards. Like, you need to find Riptide Rex by 8, but Broadmane is matchup dependent, and even Riptide Rex on 8 isn't mandatory. You've got other condensed targets. You've got a decent game plan. And that's why I think people are really liking Control right now. They are the ones that feel like they have the most agency because they do not have these power cards that they need to find in order to play the game like so many other archetypes do. Anyway, that is going to do it for me. I hope that was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. I have been Boulevard. Good luck in the Runeterra Open.